Shamantal's Day, the goddess of community, generosity and gifts. Wife of Shil and goddess of the sun, the Imperium and ancestor of the Empress. The divine mother of the Shilvanti. The last heir for Frovi. Late afternoon. Desi tossed aside her omnipad.
Right. I've alerted the girls and they're dressing up. Now can you tell me why?
Melondi flew out of her closet, pinning a dress to Desi's chest.
This one, definitely. Fine. But there's better have a coat. It's freezing outside.
It isn't freezing. Besides, teal is in this season.
Melondi nodded to herself and went wading back into the recesses of her closet.
Says who?
Desi held the dress against herself. It was a lustrous teal, worn just off the shoulders, while a lace wrap draped from the neck to her knees. Delicate and exquisitely crafted, it was exactly the thing to wear if she wanted terminal frostbite.
Seriously, Mel, what's going on? This isn't a state dinner.
And just how many state banquets have you been to?
Desi stuck out her tongue, and was rewarded with a set of teal shoes soaring out of the depths of the wardrobe.
Damn it! I'm an advisor, not a mannequin. Besides, there was that dinner for the painters. And what about you? Now that I think about it, you've been sequestered away for years.
Training!
Mel emerged from her closet with a maroon jacket.
Now hurry or we'll be late. Also, which do you want first?
The dress.
Desi pulled off her top and cast her bra aside, glaring at the ensemble on the bed.
Which I am keeping. The shoes, too.
I meant which answers?
Haste or no, Desi gave her friend a long look. She considered whistling nonchalantly, but it was hard to carry off while topless. Mel's face screwed up in frustration.
That's extortion. Blackmail.
Desi examined her nails eloquently.
No, just extortion.
Fine, just hurry up, will you?
Whatever you say, Your Royal Highness.
Desi winked and slipped out of her pants, examining the outfit practically.
You were going to let me have it anyway, right?
Mel threw up her hands in exasperation.
Yes, but it's still extortion.
Yes, it is.
Desi nodded before slipping on the dress and navigating one arm up a sleeve.
So spill it. Why is this a big deal, and what's got you so worked up?
Is that boy?
Melondi stuck out her tongue in a very unprincessly pout.
A Luntel. The Zulayman family are distant relatives by way of my third great-grand-aunt. That makes him my, I don't know, 7th or 8th cousin removed. The last thing I need is for him to catch on and try to court me. And no, I have no reason to think he would, but there's no reason to think he wouldn't. Keeping track of who's who is a Vascon art form, and once one of their men gets something stuck in their heads, you...
Oh, please. That is such a stereotype. Besides, aren't you allowed to have multiple husbands?
Well, not right now. Vadim is the one I want. And those stereotypes are based on reality. I have seen Vascons at court and been educated about the rest.
Mel helped her navigate the second sleeve and looked over the effect, straightening the wrap before stepping back and tugging off her slip.
Vascon families use alliances to keep power in their provinces exactly where they want it, and a Zulayman marrying outside his station is practically heresy. Even so, the Zulaymans and Tessus are expected to marry every few generations. Their men still eye up the palace silverware like it belongs to them. And I'm keeping your suit.
That's some of the best fabbing work, and Mr. Thario did the embroidery.
Pausing mid-shoe, she watched Melondi slipping into her pants. It was like standing in front of a living mirror, though the effect wasn't as disconcerting as it had once been.
So these Vascons style themselves as lords. Big deal. If you don't want this lord catching on, why don't we just wear our uniforms?
To dinner with Vascons? Presuming I survive, I'd never hear the end of it. Everyone is sure I'll marry someone just like him, you know. A Zulayman or a Chelksa. Even some Kyanginya's son from Sevastotav. I mean, I don't have to, but it's expected. Presenting Vadim to my mother will be hard enough. I do not need some Vascon noble spreading rumours.
So I'm dressing up as a princess who isn't a princess to impress a boy you aren't telling that you're the princess, just to avoid some ridiculous sartorial scandal at an utterly hypothetical dinner 12 years from now? That's ridiculous.
It isn't ridiculous to them, and yes.
Mel nodded, as she did up her jacket and tugged at the lapels.
Fair's fair. You've made me grow out my bangs. It's a matter of principle.
Darcy pursed her lips but gave in to the inevitable. Learning to mix with noble girls had been one thing, but fitting in at court was clearly another.
Fine. But we look great with bangs.
Deep inside the bunker, Lieutenant Behelly Tala punched up camera 318 to study her quarry. It had taken weeks to find one that was Pezrin-proof, and rotating units to discover the trick of Kzintshki's invisibility had been a major problem. The answer hadn't been so difficult as the effort required. Getting a battery of cameras had been fairly easy, but putting them in place was quite another matter. On top of that, the girl had a knack for discovering them. While Tom Watch was still a bunker favourite, everyone accepted that a cannibal near the princess merited more than a little concern, particularly if she could disappear the moment the lights went out. Special Agent Tavari made pointed remarks on the subject. Water flowed downhill, and Setar and Biona agreed that as a lieutenant with a technical background, she was just the woman for the job. It didn't matter that she still had miles of tunnel conduit to check, or that operations still didn't have a reliable interrogator. It was one more task on top of the others, but Behelly took it as a challenge and got her pod enthusiastic about the work, one camera at a time. After 57 tries, she was certain. It paid to be sure, because Kzintshki had a knack of drifting out of view and never returning. Quite simply, how did you know you were seeing someone if they turned invisible? Were they there when you weren't seeing them? Were they not there at all? She hadn't given up even when cameras started disappearing. Finally, one night, there she was. Camera 1138 kept watch over the campus commons, and hadn't shown a thing, but one of her new cams showed a very distinctive tail. It would be a dark and stormy night, and time passed as slowly as a sea snail on sedatives. It was the kind of night that reminded her of the stakeout, where she'd earned her promotion. A cold, dreary and dismal night, where she'd waited endlessly for the autocab she called, feeling like it would never come to the lonely seaside district where dark, or at least very poorly lit, deeds abounded, in the low places of sin and iniquity, much like the academy on a shell night. Over the past year, the psychotic dockside killer has strangled 7 men, 2 pouchadillos and an eel, but that was another story. On cam 1138, everything was clear, but nearby, while on 57A, the telescopic lens caught her disappearing into the shrubbery. After taking both units apart and poking at them for days, the answer dawned on her. The problem wasn't that the cameras worked, it was that they worked as designed. Once darkness fell, the microcams cut to an infrared filtration system. That layer superseded the others, and whatever it was about Pezrin, they did not show up in IR, spoofing the system entirely. 57A was just a primitive low-light unit. "I've got you now." Tala crossed her arms in satisfaction as she watched Kzintshki dress. Tala had felt a warm glow of professional triumph, and for the first time in weeks she'd gotten a decent night's sleep, confident in her beliefs of the power of technology. Sadly, there was no chance of replacing all 3,271 of the Z-Site Mark 64 microcams around campus, even if state-of-the-art called for Mark 81s. Their budget was large, but not infinite. Command had tagged a large portion to clearing the compound of potential taps and upgrading the counter-intrusion architecture, but nothing else was moving. Requests to bring the bunker up to full staff were waiting to be signed off by senior leadership, who were off with the Empress. In the meantime, while parts were coming in for the tunnel work, interrogators weren't cheap. Thousands of microcams were expensive, and Pezrin were rare. Her report would be taken under advisement and forwarded to the camera manufacturers for use in the Z-Site 82s. In the meantime, they could keep track of one girl using the Mark I eyeball. It deeply vexed her technician's soul, but sometimes she had to make do. After all, it seemed to work, and she watched her quarry bend down at her desk, writing. Kzintshki considered herself in the mirror. After blowing her hair dry and applying a touch of gel to an errant tuft along her Asiac, she groomed it into place with Desala's brush. The gel evaporated, and she examined the effect with a cursory nod. While not fine enough to properly groom an Asiac, it remained the most prized of her acquisitions. It would be a shame to put it back, but it was the end of the year. Desala was an ally by extension now, and while there hadn't been any declarations, Desala supported Melondi, who was also supported by her Hahakt. The convergence of alliances required the return of property, even if Shorvanti didn't understand these things. It was a matter of principle, and property mattered. Of course, it had been a good acquisition. Theft was an honourable tradition, practiced as a matter of survival, but there was still an art to it. Style and finesse were obligatory, and the brush had taken 5 hours silently making her way through the vents. Avoiding the security cameras was becoming a real pain, but how you acquired a thing could be as important as the thing itself. With something so personal as a comb, it was more so. There were the 7 levels of Gardana to consider. The act came down to the monetary or personal value of what was taken. If it was useful for survival, the style with which it was taken, if the item was returned or not, if or how the loss was noticed, whether it was from an enemy, ally, or someone unaligned, and, best of all, the amount of aggravation it caused. Not being caught went without saying. The most basic act of Gardana had no factors to consider, but simply taking something was for kits. In adults, it was crass, whereas the pinnacle involved taking something of great value that your warband needed for survival from an enemy who not only never learned you had done it, but didn't even know they had lost it. At least for a few days. During her first weeks at the academy, taking something from the girls had been important. She mistrusted the school and her Hahakt, and it was instructive to see how they reacted, but it became clear her Hahakt favoured her classmates, which put things on another claw. Taking things of worth was out of the question. One did not damage prospective alliances between warbands. Still, it was good for others to know you were capable, so small acquisitions were a matter of course. If someone became an ally, the item was returned and nothing was said. Despite the informal arrangements, her friends had requested her role at the Northern Palace. They knew her skill and she had proven her worth. Clearly, the principle was sound, even with Shorvanti. Princess Kamordri had been their enemy, and the Shorvanti understood enemies. The pinnacle of Gardana enriched your warband, while your enemies tore each other to ragged pelts. If someone became an enemy, it was reasonable to take whatever was needed, even obligatory. After all, if an enemy was too weak to keep what was theirs, they didn't deserve to have it. And past's gift is even better than the ear. For neutral parties, that meant items of medium worth, but ideally with a high aggravation factor. At the end of the year, they were yours to keep or burn. Not counting her friends, this year she'd acquired 6 rather exquisite pens, 4 remote control wands, 5 combs, 2 brushes, 13 individual socks, half of several hairbands, and a battery. She even had Garnier Sasano's favourite Ubeki glass, but her prize was the Omnipath stylus from the reviled head administrator of Soche Pan Technical. Garnier's glass would be returned along with her secretary's pen, while the other pens would go to Sunchaser. The remote controls would turn up, while the socks and other ephemera would be disposed of. For condemning her to suffer indignities at the hands of her classmates, Administrator Rasani's stylus would be ritually destroyed with gleeful abandon. It had, on the whole, been a good year, and she already had designs on Lamana Duvari's conductor's baton. It all came down to style, really, and the Wisdom girls wouldn't be around forever. It would take at least a few days to discover the level of adversary they represented. As captives, they were no threat, but their status seemed symbolic. It was irksome. Worst of all, they were not to be eaten. Examining herself in the mirror, her recite gave a satisfied twitch. Her family shawl draped about her perfectly, and it was time for a feast. At least some people understood dressing up for an occasion. Having finished her preparation, she leaned over her desk and wrote a note, taking particular care that her Vatica was legible. New cameras had been appearing for weeks now, and after picking a few apart, it felt as if someone was making her into their hobby. The print on the casings gave it away. Someone was making an effort. Kalima's devs heads were upping their game, which was well and good. It was reasonable. It was expected. They were doing their jobs. And it wasn't Gardana if your victims made it easy. One night she let herself be seen. After all, part of the fun was rubbing someone's nose in it now and then. Try though they might, Shorvanti microcams still produced a high-pitched whine. It would have been unfair if they weren't all over the campus.
It's all about style and aggravation,
she reflected, as she held up the sign. Nice try. She gave the camera a wave before tossing a shirt over it.
Time for dinner!
Ganya sat in her living room, nursing a small glass. The bottle of Oborodo had been a Shimantul's Day gift from her counterpart at Vrism, and it seemed apropos to try it before meeting the Vrism hostages at dinner. The quintet were settling in as best they could, given that the Zulayman lordling had been yoked to Jama. Odd as it was, it seemed Tom Warwick had a sense of humour. While Jama Hameres no longer scandalised the younger set, he still retained a reputation amongst parents. A call from Duke Janel would surely be in the offing. Oborodo wasn't her drink of choice, but Ganya had just taken up the glass to appreciate the bouquet when her Omnipad hummed for attention. The message was from an unknown number, and she swiped up the locale indent feature. The owner hadn't blocked their information. Vascon. She recognised the administrator's name and messaged back to see if now was a good time to talk.
Probably checking up. At least I can thank her for a gift.
It didn't take long for her on the pad to chime. She swiped it open and exchanged the expected pleasantries. Soon enough, things fell into place.
I hope this was a good time to call, Mrs. Sasano. I trust my boys and girls aren't getting into trouble.
She smiled, framing her reply. She'd been nervous in her first few years helming the academy, but Vida seemed a pleasant young woman. The thought of her boys in a school for young ladies was probably giving her fits, which was fair. After the morning's unseemly display, she was prepared to give the students a proper earful.
Please, call me Ganya. They're nothing we can't handle, and their jailers are helping them settle. Also, thank you so much for the bottle. The Oborodo is exceptional.
She shifted in her seat and set her glass down.
I hope our girls are behaving themselves too.
There was movement in the background, and the sound of a closing door before Director Isabeau's returned to the call.
Oh, I'm glad you enjoyed it, and they're making themselves at home. My husband and I are overwhelmed by your gift for little Ibisco. Credit to my husband where credit is due, and congratulations again on the birth of your son.
Ganya beamed, privately thanking the goddess for having such a gifted secretary, Impeli. The woman was a treasure, and a gift for her child was so much more personable.
Thank you. So I had your message to call. What was it you wanted my help with?
Pleasantries concluded, Ganya launched into her request.
The professor handling your students wants to throw a co-ed ball of some sort that's contemporary to the classwork. A USO dance? Might you ask after Grand Duke Zulayman's assistance in this matter?
Though it wasn't spoken, Ganya's meaning was quite clear.
Yes, it's a long shot, all right, and we're both getting the term started, but we don't have any boys. Could you help me humour my faculty and make the proper noises about sending us some? Really? That is, I think that might be possible. The season's officially on hiatus in deference to the Empress and the royal family, and the poor Duke is beside himself of having to cancel so many events.
Ganya took that to mean the obvious.
I have boys going stir-crazy now that the spring social season is effectively decimated. Please get some of them out of my hair and we'll call it even. You'll be doing me a great favour, Isabeau, and it will certainly strengthen the ties between our schools.
Something blew into the microphone on Isabeau's side, nearly snatching away her response.
Lady Debibar Zulayman has a dinner meeting with my substitute tomorrow. My husband will be there, and I'll ask if he can raise the idea with her to get this plant growing. Can you send me the details before 5 p.m. tomorrow, my time? Of course. I'll see what Professor Warwick has in mind and send you the details. If you can let me know how many to expect, I'll see to it that attendance from our young ladies is appropriate. Which means finding out just what a USO is, and keeping any boys from being mobbed.
A co-educational dance sounded harmless. Apparently, there was some form of costuming involved. The call ended, and Ganya smiled to herself as she swiped open Pelly's number. Yes, she would have an early morning to get that message to Isabeau, but Mavere had landed a planner in her husband. For good or ill, Tom Warwick seldom presented ideas he hadn't fleshed out in his thoughts, and there would have to be details about the music, the theme, and of course, the attendance restrictions. Still, the Academy had all the facilities needed for pre-term celebrations and countless other functions. A ball tied to classwork would give them all something to do without breaking any social restrictions. The event would be educational. There were no hummingbirds on Shill. As he set aside the flower bag, Tom gazed out the kitchen window at the landscape beyond. The solstice was past and the days would slowly grow longer, but it was still deep in Shill's winter season, such as it was, and it was growing dark even at this early hour. Back on Earth, he'd be waiting for the hummingbirds. Watching them on the feeder outside his kitchen had been one of the simple pleasures of life, just like cooking fried chicken the way his mother had done it. 2 fried chickens had saved his mother's life when she'd been a child. Laying in bed with a frightening fever, a neighbour had promised her 2 chickens for frying if she pulled through. Hope was a powerful thing, and after the fever broke, she'd gone straight for her chickens. Such was the power of hope. Making fried chicken brought recollections of happy times, and now he was sharing them with a new generation. As the apartment filled with the sound of laughter and conversation, he looked around at the gathering crowd. The Shulvanti had certainty, and certainty made life, well, maybe not easy, but easier. They had a sense of rightness about the way things should be, a surety you could bend iron bars around. Desi has shown such strength in her recovery. Kalira had it. Maver had it from the first time she laid eyes on him, though only she and Shalea knew why it lasted. He might look like a pink version of their lost husband, but nothing he'd heard about Chanda made him think they were alike as people. He listened to his Miv and Leia, cared about what they said and thought and felt. Between the lines he tried to pass out something of the man he'd only seen in pictures. Honestly, if the happiness of my life depends on the quality of my thoughts, why do I have to be such a moody bastard? He knew it was the business with Kalira. It left him feeling moody and helpless. The ethics were a topic for Santino Barcio, but much as he'd wanted to invite the priest over, the crowd for tonight's Ifrovi feast had surpassed easy limits. There was a sense of, did you make enough? And chicken for the 60-odd humans residing in the outreach centre was a job for the kitchen at Human Food. Still, I ought to see Santino soon. Besides Miv and Solani, Ganya would be coming with her co-wife, Nedrin, and their husband, Birom. They were good people, and Ganya was so much more to Miv than her boss. They saw each other all the time at school functions, but this was their first time here in their home. He enjoyed the privacy, here in the enclosed world of the Academy, but the invitation was long overdue after all these months. The girls would be here, though Kzintshki had dealt with her band sisters. Being banished from a feast was a big deal to the Petrin, which had developed into an emphatic debate. While they hadn't been invited, Kzintshki's efforts to move them on seemed half-hearted, so he'd promised a meal when his pantry wasn't stretched to the limit. Petrin valued a promise, and he'd used the hard chuffing sound that formed their emphatic prefix. It earned him blank stares and a giggle from the one named Raikishi, but it worked. It was just as well. After examining his pantry, he revised the food required to host 4 healthy Petrin girls, sharply upward to hungry Sephir levels. With Belda and Prius back from their trip to Willist, that made his tiny world complete again. Liam Clarson would be coming, and he made a mental note to invite Hope over, but not tonight. It seemed like a good idea to survey any damage from the trip. After their encounter at the seminar, Maver's opinion was that Hope was a promising woman of great depth. He'd pegged Hope as quietly feisty, and offered that Miv might be biased, while Miv promptly pointed out Hope's academic rise at Swago Academy, then proceeded to tease him about it. Any way he looked at it, he didn't want to upset Hope. There weren't that many humans about. Hannah McClendon arrived with a statuesque woman named Jalissa in tow, as Hannah's +1. Hannah was a nice girl, and with her family gone, a gentle reminder that she wasn't alone seemed like the thing to do. The invitation hadn't been formal, but if she felt the need to bring a friend along, that was fine. She and Jalissa had dressed up in scarlet blouses, skirts that rose just over the knee, and long black jackets so sharp they could cut you. It was a daring look, but they worked at the tide pool, and they weren't the only ones making a show. Liam Clarson had arrived with Belda and Prasala. It wasn't like his radar went off, but with every Shovanti you didn't need radar. Belle and Priz moved around Liam in a way that screamed, "He's mine!" Every Shovanti woman did it. Miv and Leia did it. Lani had started doing it. Tom had seen other races as human food. What seemed like a lopsided gender ratio was actually the galactic norm, and staking a claim was a habit they had in common. Makiri families practically flexed their claws, but the matter was never left in doubt. Belle and Priz had planted their flag, and it was Liam, though he seemed happy about it. He caught Liam's eye after his unspoken welcome across the room to Belle and Priz. Liam gave a quick nod, and Tom had cocked an eyebrow in his best "you and I will be talking" expression, before Liam was swept into the crowd. There had been a happy splash of conversation as the girls descended on Belle and Priz. Yeah, he's gotten laid, but he looks happy about it. Somehow I ended up with a normal, loving, bright group of people with caring hearts and inquisitive minds. A whole messy heap of friends and relationships. It sounded better than surrounded by imperious galactic conquistadors and a cannibal. People were enjoying themselves. Tom went back to cooking with a quiet smile. It was for that reason he didn't notice how the room changed when the Rhythm kids arrived. Kzintshki considered the feast with great attention. As her Hakakt, Tom's interests formed part of their pact. After all, to consume someone and take their name honoured the giver, but the receiver should know their new name. To take a name without understanding the bestower would be hollow and without meaning. A name required scope. As did gravy, and she watched carefully as the meat sauce was made ready. It paid to mind one's surroundings at all times, and as the Rhythm captives were under his care, a cursory look was needful. Her Hahakt was bestowing a grand welcome by offering them food. Captives were rarely fed unless being ransomed or fattened up. Still, the Shovanti existed in a galaxy of plenty. Their world was a verdant garden compared to what she knew of Pesh. To partake of another's flesh was taboo for Shovanti, reserved for ancient tales of stranded sailors. The basics of survival were an abstraction to them, but she knew better. It paid to check such things. True, the Rhythm students might prove an interesting diversion, but they were captives. There was nothing ethical about hurting the defenseless, but Gardana didn't require inflicting pain. Besides, their possessions were clustered together on a boat, down on the water. On Pesh, water largely came in rain, steam, or frozen. Water was dangerous and swimming a deadly proposition. But swimming was also a skill. It could be learnt, and her mother had insisted. It was even practical, living on a world with such a nautical inclination. Thanks to her rigorous training and titanium discipline, she managed to fight her way out of Professor Pelavon's swimming pool. Mostly. The notion of minor acquisitions from captives smelled of great effort and little return, much like the students themselves. She bumped fists with the two Shovanti women and noted their demeanour. It was aloof, and the one named Zatara seemed to be competing with Desala to ignore one another. Amateurs. The human, Andre, was mildly interesting. Deshin seemed taken with him, though she was being polite by their standards, and hadn't rubbed against him once. He carried himself well, though understanding him was something for another time. A comparison to her Hahakt might be useful. For now, the Shovanti were being Shovanti, richly comparing clothes. It was a futile waste of time. After all, she was the best-dressed sentient in the room. As for the last of the risen captives, she was the one that looked nearly human. An Urbian. She was unfamiliar with the species. Kzintshki sniffed as the girl practically bounded over, and she very nearly stepped back before the girl threw her arms around her. Hi! I'm Citri of the Vida Warren, or House Vida, if you want to go by local customs. I've never met a Peshran before. It's so nifty. I mean, I didn't know there were other races besides Shovanti here. What's your world like? I mean, if you're not busy, I'd love to hear about... what's the name of it? I mean, after your name, of course. Kzintshki blinked at the girl, though for courtesy's sake she did it twice. The girl's long ears rotated to listen, though that wasn't the issue.
Call me Citri.
Kzintshki.
It's nice to meet you. Sorry about the personal space. Sometimes I forget I'm not in the Warren, and I'm just excited to be here. I know, not everyone's a hugger, right?
No.
Kzintshki's psych gave a first-degree twitch of affirmation.
Not a hugger.
Oh, well, it'd be great getting to know you, but I guess it's almost gift time. Citri cantered ahead toward the immense pile in the corner before leaning in with a conspiratorial smile. I think my friends are hungry enough to eat a Turox, but they won't admit to it, you know. Anyway, talk later, okay? Kzintshki watched the girl disappear back into the noisy maelstrom. As a feast for captives, it seemed wholly inappropriate, but that wasn't her problem. The Urbian girl, with her bright red hair, bouncing ears, and cloyingly happy personality, on the other hand, could pose a trying test of her resolve.
Dark Mother, help me. She is not my captive.
Kzintshki followed the tips of the girl's ears as she bounded off to talk with Desi, and people gathered toward the sunken pit while her Hakakt finished the last of his preparations. There was no doubt that the girl could become a problem, requiring careful consideration, tact, and possibly bribery. If first impressions counted for anything, then her presence would be a strain. Because Citri Vida smelled delicious. Tom bit his lip as the gifts were passed around. Jaxmi had claimed the right to go first, and her surprises were unveiled one after the other. Mostly they were offerings of silk, but Kamara was delighted to open a large case, revealing a guitar. She had clearly drawn out the acoustic six-string and hugged Jaxmi, promising it would have a wonderful home after its old owner. Then she asked if he knew who Carlos Santana was. Tom didn't spit out his drink, answered the question, then pressed on with dinner. Her uncle had found it on eBay. There were no gifts for him or Miv, though that was to be expected. The girls hadn't passed into their third year, and gifts for teachers were strictly prohibited. He didn't mind. Given the almost terrifying wealth and power of their houses, it made sense to avoid compromising situations. The girls were already like family. Desi had literally become family, and Melondi is a good reason there are rules. Small gifts to students were another matter, and while the credit limit for gifts was low, the exchange rate on Earth made it go a long way. He barely had to touch his pay. He lived with Miv and got groceries in exchange for cooking in the restaurant. It was a good arrangement. Budin got street cred for authentic human cuisine, Vadim and Melondi got each other. He'd still been appalled how little the gifts set him back, but he set that aside as he handed them out. He smiled in satisfaction as the cases were opened. A dozen Ayato, the practice katana used in the art of Aido, and custom made for Shivanti. The girls exclaimed as the training blades were drawn forth, save for the identical pair going to Kamara and Kazlin. The fittings on each matched their house colours. It was a happy moment, and he committed it to memory. Enjoy that elaborate knot in the Seigo. That's the belt cord. Trust me, once you untie it, you'll never see it again. Desi assured him that fabbing outfits wasn't a problem, but Ayato blades were specific. Like katana, the length of the blade matched the proportions of the owner, and there had barely been time to send the order and get them from Earth. The girls looked delighted, which just left one problem. Kzintshki. Her Isaac flipped listlessly into second-degree acceptance as she studied the gleaming training swords. With one thing and another, their relationship had moved past the food stage, but the order was sent and there hadn't been time. Fortunately, she was just about the right size. Just one more thing. Tom squeezed Miv's hand before reaching under the couch to pull out the blue silk bag. Kzintshki, I've called this blade Sotami Shita, which means mother-in-law's tongue, because nothing cuts quite as deep. And now, I'm giving it to you. She drew open the ties, exposing the sword. The deep beige wrap about the hilt showed the wear of use, but otherwise it was a fine blade. True, it was a bit off from her optimal length, but he had no doubt she'd manage and make it her own. Besides, I have the blade Adam gave me from the exhibit, which deserves better than being hidden in my closet.
Tom smiled as she held the blade. It's my gift, as your hakakt. Consider it a thank you for not eating me. Yet. Well, or anyone. She quivered, and her Asaiak did something he'd never seen before. Aluntel moved as unobtrusively as he could, while Kalai walked beside him as his chaperone. It was a trained response, and he wove his way about the room with practiced grace. The professor's invitation was a lovely gesture, and the academy girls had dressed for the occasion. After the samples of human food Andy prepared before the season's postponement, this chance at a proper human dinner party was a dream come true. After 2 passes by the kitchen, the quality of food was clearly worthwhile. Upon inquiry, Professor Warwick assured him the recipe for tonight's event went back generations. His experience with fried chicken was non-existent, though Kalai mentioned something greasy from a red and white bucket. During their walk over, Andy had assured him KFC was a local standard, though it didn't compare to good salmon. But now? Well, one should never ignore a family secret. Any true Vascon did so at their peril. Zatara was plain to be the dour wallflower, spending her time exchanging barbs with her jailer. From the occasional win, she was getting as well as she was giving. It was refreshing to watch, though she still kept track of Andy at a distance. Tshirt was happily flitting about, being an Urbian and divider, making friends wherever she went.
And I forced poor friend Andy into the limelight. It will do him good with the matches he's been attempting to make. He desperately needs the practice.
He positively ensured these northern girls would notice his tall human friend, and deployed enough subtle wordplay to plant the seeds of interest, or at least to infer Andre was open to receiving their suits, now that they'd been properly introduced. For some, the message seemed to have flown quite over their heads, though his intended target was taking an interest. He moved to the edge of the gathering to watch as Lady Deshin Pelavon occupied Andy's attention with a smile. It was only fitting. Her gown was sublime.
Oh, you're jailer or not, I was right about the both of you.
Andy's teal and red ensemble had been a good choice, as Lady Deshin had worn an exquisite hand-knotted Baringa lace dress in a fortuitous match.
If only he'd have let me weave the gold wire with the scarlet glowstones into his braid.
Nonetheless, Aluntel congratulated himself on a job well done. Now it would fall to him to learn more about Deshin from her mothers. He looked about and identified the girl's family. Her recent co-mother, the captain, never took her eyes off her, especially when Tshirt introduced herself. It showed a commendable attention to propriety, even by northern standards.
A Death's Head captain, a primary teacher in the capital, and 2 respectable Ailey professors. A most accomplished quartet of parents with excellent connections. An ideal union.
A rare laugh escaped Andy's lips as something Lady Deshin said, before a girl Aluntel would have sworn was her sister joined them with drinks. He dismissed the new girl after a cursory look at her attire, which was charming, if uninspired. He could feel a tension building off of Kalai as she watched the 3 of them in silence, but she had played the game long enough and knew the rules of the season. Despite being one of Andy's suitors, tradition dictated, nay, demanded, that she keep a respectful distance whenever he made new acquaintances. Tshirt occupied her time wisely by making acquaintances herself, but she had her limits and paid attention too. A minute or 3 after Kalai would leave to mingle with the hosts, she'd reliably make her way back to ensure Aluntel had a protector. Aluntel raised his glass of blue grell to his lips to take a sip when another laugh from his friend drew his attention.
My, twice in one encounter? You are smitten, aren't you?
Aluntel paused as something else caught his eye. The glass had blocked his view for but a moment, yet something gave him pause. Levity departed as he casually drew forth a pocket mirror for checking his makeup. Idly, he used the case to block out the lower half of Lady Deshin's face. An icy pit formed in his stomach.
Oh no.
The bangs, her cheekbones, even the way she carried herself, always under the gaze of a captain of the Imperial Death's Heads. Even her dress, so resplendent even in present company, lent credence to his surmise. It was shocking, impossible.
Yet father always said palace subterfuge knew no bounds. Surely his eyes did not deceive him. While he'd never met his sixth cousin once removed, he'd seen that remarkable address like everyone in Vasconia. Talk of it on the family server had become an uproar after Camordra's death. That, and of the possibilities. As Alantel sauntered closer, he listened to her voice, and heard it. There could be no mistake. It was the same. The voice that had spoken to the whole Empire not days ago. Beyond a doubt, it was she, and horror suffused his entire being. "Oh dear Nyosa, I've thrown friend Andy at cousin Kalera."